In Victorian London, a single orange could cost a full day's wages for a poor family. For the children of the workhouse, that one piece of fruit was their entire Christmas, and somehow they were grateful for it. If you use these to fall asleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. Comment where you're at in the time too. Kind of fun seeing all the different places. Someone from Iceland commented once and I had to Google what time zone that even is. So, we're going back to Victorian London tonight, but hold on, get yourself comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. The bitter cold was the first thing Martha felt. Always the cold. It seeped through the thin blanket, through her nightgown, through her skin, right down to her bones. Her eyes flickered open to darkness, just the faintest grey light seeping through frosted windows. Christmas Eve morning in the London workhouse. She was 10 years old, though small enough to pass for 7. 3 years in the workhouse had stunted her growth, but not her spirit. Not yet. Up everyone up. The harsh voice of Mrs. Grimwig, the workhouse matron, shattered the pre-dawn quiet. No lazing about today, floors to scrub, laundry to wash, Christmas doesn't clean itself. Around Martha, 24 girls stirred in their narrow beds. The dormitory was a long, cheerless room with peeling paint and windows that let in nearly as much cold as they did light. The beds were arranged in 2 perfect rows. Military precision demanded even in sleep. "Martha," whispered a small voice from the next bed. "Is it really Christmas tomorrow?" Martha turned to little Betsy, just 6 years old and new to the workhouse. Her parents had died of fever only months ago. "Yes, it is. And you know what that means?" Betsy's eyes widened. "What? Might be pudding for dinner? And," Martha lowered her voice conspiratorially, "they say we might each get an orange." The word hung in the air like magic. Orange, the colour of sunrise, the taste of sunshine. Once a year, on Christmas Day, the benefactors of the workhouse brought oranges, one for each child, the single day of the year when something sweet and bright entered their grey existence. "What's an orange like?" Betsy asked, her voice small with wonder. Martha's chapped lips curved into a smile. "It's the most wonderful thing you'll ever taste, sweet and tangy all at once, and when you peel it, the smell is like heaven might smell." She closed her eyes, remembering. "My mum used to get us one at Christmas, before. Silence. Mrs. Grimwig was suddenly looming over them, her face pinched with annoyance. "Save your chatter for chapel, get dressed and downstairs in 5 minutes, or there'll be no breakfast." The girls scrambled out of bed, shivering as bare feet hit the icy floor. Martha helped Betsy with the buttons of her uniform, a shapeless grey dress with a white apron, identical to what every girl in the workhouse wore. Their breath clouded in front of their faces as they dressed. "You won't believe the size of the fire they'll have going tonight," Martha whispered to Betsy as they made their bed with quick practiced movements. "Christmas Eve is the one night they let it burn higher than usual." "Is Father Christmas real?" Betsy asked suddenly. Martha's hands stilled on the rough blanket. The question hit her like a physical blow. She remembered asking her own mother the same question years ago in their tiny but happy home, before the fever took her parents, before the workhouse. "Course he is," she said firmly, "but he can't bring much to the workhouse. Too many children, see? That's why the benefactors bring the oranges instead." "Hurry up, girls," another shout from downstairs. Martha grabbed Betsy's hand. "Come on, don't want to miss breakfast. It's Christmas Eve porridge." "Is it different from regular porridge?" Martha grinned. "Nah, still tastes like wallpaper paste, but we tell ourselves it's special anyway." The dining hall was cavernous and cold, with long wooden tables and benches. 100 children sat in silence, shoveling thin porridge into their mouths. The only sound was the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional cough. Talking during meals was forbidden. From a seat, Martha could see through a doorway into the kitchen where enormous copper pots were already bubbling. Preparations for tomorrow's Christmas dinner. She nudged Betsy and nodded toward the kitchen. See? They're already cooking for tomorrow. Bet they're making plum pudding. A tall, painfully thin man in a black coat strode into the dining hall. Mr. Penge, the workhouse master. The children instinctively sat straighter. Children, he announced, his voice echoing. Today being Christmas Eve, there will be adjustments to the schedule. A murmur of excitement rippled through the room, quickly silenced by his stern glare. Work duties will continue until 4 o'clock, at which time you will return to your dormitories to wash and change for evening chapel. Following the service, there will be bread and cheese in the dining hall, after which you will retire for the night. He paused, scanning the room. I expect exemplary behaviour from all of you. Our benefactors have been generous this year, and tomorrow's festivities depend on your conduct today. Martha felt a thrill of anticipation. Benefactors meant oranges. Mr. Penge's reference to them could only be a good sign. After breakfast, the children were divided into their work groups. Martha and the older girls were assigned to scrub the entrance hall and main corridors. The work was punishing. On her hands and knees for hours, the harsh lye soap cracking her skin, the cold water making her fingers so numb she could barely feel the brush. Heard they've got a whole crate of oranges coming, whispered Nancy, the girl working beside her. At 13, Nancy was one of the oldest girls and therefore a source of workhouse wisdom. More than usual, might even get a bigger piece this year. Really? Martha scrubbed harder, excitement giving her energy. Where'd you hear that? Cook's assistant told me. Said she saw the order list in Mr. Penge's office. A whole crate from Covent Garden Market. My fingers are turning blue, Betsy whimpered from Martha's other side. The little girl's hands were indeed an alarming shade. Here, Martha whispered, taking Betsy's hands between her own and rubbing vigorously. Got to keep the blood moving. Think of something warm. Like sitting right next to a fire with chestnuts roasting. Never had chestnuts, Betsy said. Me neither, admitted Martha, but I've smelled them roasting in the street vendors' pans. Makes your mouth water something fierce. A shadow fell over them. Less talking, more scrubbing, Mrs. Grimwig snapped. Those floors won't clean themselves. The girls bent to their work again. Martha's back ached and her knees were raw from the hard floor, but she kept going. Christmas was coming, an orange was coming, just one more day of work and then a feast, by workhouse standards at least. As she scrubbed, Martha thought of Christmases before the workhouse. They'd been poor, her family, but happy. Her father worked at the docks. Her mother took in washing. At Christmas, they'd had a small pudding and, if the year had been good, an orange to share among the three of them. Her father would carefully peel it, dividing it into segments with surgical precision, making sure each piece was exactly the same size. One piece of sunshine for each of us, he'd say, his weathered face creasing with a smile. The memory made Martha's eyes sting. She blinked rapidly, focusing on the floor. Crying wouldn't bring them back. Nothing would. The day crawled by. The children's hands grew raw from work. Their stomachs growled with hunger. Dinner was thin soup and a slice of bread, meagre even by workhouse standards, as if to make tomorrow's slightly more generous meal seem all the more magnificent by comparison. As promised, at 4 o'clock they were sent to wash and change for chapel. Change simply meant putting on their slightly less ragged uniforms, saved for Sundays and special occasions. The cold water from the pump in the washroom was like ice, but they scrubbed their faces and hands until they glowed red, knowing that cleanliness would be inspected before chapel. In the girls' dormitory, excitement buzzed like electricity. Christmas was a spark of light in their dreary existence, the one day when the outside world remembered them, the one day when they were children, not just workhouse inmates. "I heard the benefactors are coming tomorrow, wearing fur coats and jewels," one girl said as she braided another's hair. "I heard they're bringing a whole orange for each of us, not just half like last year," said another. "And pudding with real brandy in it." Martha listened to the chatter, her heart beating faster, an entire orange of her own. The thought was almost too wonderful to imagine. When the bell rang for chapel, the children filed out in 2 orderly lines, girls on one side, boys on the other. They were not allowed to speak to each other, except during supervised activities, and even then, interaction between boys and girls was discouraged. Martha spotted her little brother Tom in the boys' line. At 8, he was the spitting image of their father. Same dark hair, same serious expression. He caught her eye and gave a tiny, secret wave. She winked back, their private signal that meant, "I'm okay, are you okay?" He nodded, almost imperceptibly. The chapel was the one beautiful space in the workhouse. For Christmas Eve, it had been decorated with holly and ivy, and actual candles burned in sconces on the walls, a rare extravagance. The children filed into the hard wooden pews, their faces turned up to the warm glow of the candles. Mr. Penge stood at the pulpit, his tall figure casting a long shadow. "Tonight," he intoned, "we remember the birth of our Saviour in humble circumstances. Let his example of humility guide you in your gratitude for the charity shown to you, the undeserving poor." Martha tried not to fidget during the sermon. Mr. Penge droned on about sin and redemption and the virtue of work. She focused instead on the flickering candlelight, the smell of beeswax and pine, the anticipation of tomorrow. After chapel came the promised bread and cheese in the dining hall. It wasn't much, but the very fact that it was an extra meal made it special. Martha managed to sneak her piece of cheese to Tom when the supervisors weren't looking. Boys always got hungrier than girls, she thought. Then it was back to the dormitories. The workhouse quieted as darkness fell completely. Outside, snow began to drift down, turning London into a Christmas scene from a storybook, though the magic rarely reached inside these walls. As she lay in her narrow bed, Martha whispered to Betsy, "One more sleep till Christmas, till oranges." Betsy's eyes were already drifting closed. "Tell me again what they taste like." Martha smiled in the darkness. "Like sunshine, like the best day of summer captured in something you can hold in your hand. You'll see tomorrow." She pulled her thin blanket up to her chin, watching the snow fall outside the window. Despite the cold, despite the hunger and the work, and the dreariness of workhouse life, a small flame of excitement burned in her chest. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow there would be an orange. And for the children of the workhouse, that was everything. Across London, in a grand house on Berkeley Square, another 10-year-old girl awoke on Christmas Eve, but Eleanor Blackwood didn't feel the bite of cold. Her 4-poster bed was heaped with quilts and surrounded by heavy velvet curtains that kept draughts at bay. When she opened her eyes, a fire was already crackling in the grate, tended by a maid who had crept in silently at dawn. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," said the maid Sarah, drawing back the curtains to reveal a world transformed by snow. "Happy Christmas Eve." Eleanor sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Unlike Martha's dormitory, Eleanor's bedroom was a wonderland of comfort. Papered walls in soft blue, a thick carpet underfoot, shelves lined with books and toys, and a dressing table crowded with silver-backed brushes and crystal bottles. "It's snowing," Eleanor exclaimed, rushing to the window. Below, Berkeley Square was blanketed in white, pristine, except for the tracks of early delivery carts. "How beautiful," Sarah smiled indulgently. "Yes, miss, a proper Christmas snow. Your breakfast is ready whenever you'd like it." Eleanor turned from the window with a little frown. "Will father be at breakfast?" Sarah's smile faltered. "I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood has already gone to his office, miss. Banking matters, even on Christmas Eve, but he promised to be home by luncheon." "And mother?" "Mrs. Blackwood is still asleep. She was quite tired from the dinner party last night." Eleanor nodded, used to this response. Her father, Cornelius Blackwood, was one of London's most successful bankers. Her mother, Caroline, was one of London's most fashionable hostesses. Both roles required much time away from their only child. "I'll dress and come down," Eleanor decided. "The blue wool dress, I think." While Sarah laid out her clothes, Eleanor went to her window seat, kneeling to watch the snow continue to fall. 3 stories below, a ragged child was sweeping the street crossing, hoping for pennies from ladies and gentlemen who wanted to keep their hems clean. The sight made her think of something she'd overheard at her mother's dinner party the night before. "Davis, you're still planning the workhouse visit tomorrow?" a gentleman had asked her father. "Every Christmas, without fail," her father had replied. "Blackwood Bank has been the chief benefactor of St. Bart's workhouse for 20 years. Tradition, you know. Load of rubbish, if you ask me," another man had muttered. "Spoiling them with treats. They should be grateful for the roof over their heads." Her father had smiled tightly. "I believe in the spirit of Christmas charity, Wellesley, and it's good business besides. The papers always report on it favourably." "Father, may I come too?" Eleanor had asked impulsively, entering the drawing room when she shouldn't have been there at all. She'd been promptly sent back to the nursery with a gentle rebuke, but not before she saw the discomfort on her father's face. Now, watching the crossing sweeper below, Eleanor wondered what the workhouse was really like. She'd heard whispers from the servants, harsh conditions, meagre food, endless work, so different from her own sheltered existence. "Miss," Sarah interrupted her thoughts, "your dress is ready." Dressed in fine blue wool with white lace at the collar and cuffs, Eleanor descended to the breakfast room. Though her parents were absent, the table was set with silver and crystal, a feast laid out on the sideboard, eggs, kippers, toast, porridge with cream, sausages and winter fruits. Eleanor took a small portion of eggs and a piece of toast, then sat alone at one end of the long mahogany table. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Mr. Parker, the butler, entered with the mail. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor. Cook asks if the breakfast is satisfactory." "Yes, thank you," Eleanor replied automatically, though she'd barely tasted it. "Mr. Parker, do you know about the workhouse visit tomorrow?" The butler's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, miss, an annual tradition for your father." "What's it like there? The workhouse?" Mr. Parker hesitated. "It's not a place you need concern yourself with, Miss Eleanor." "But I want to know," she persisted. "Father's taking gifts there, isn't he?" "Yes, miss. Food baskets, clothing, and I believe oranges for the children." Mr. Parker straightened a fork that was already perfectly aligned. "Your father is most generous." "Oranges?" Eleanor glanced at the crystal bowl in the centre of the table, filled with oranges, apples, and nuts, such common things in her world. "A rare treat for the less fortunate, miss," Mr. Parker explained. "Most workhouse children taste oranges only at Christmas, if at all." Eleanor tried to imagine this, but couldn't. In her home, fruit was always available, changing with the seasons but never absent entirely. The idea that an orange could be a treasured gift seemed impossible. "I'd like to come on the visit," she announced. "Will you tell father when he returns?" "As you wish, miss," Mr. Parker replied non-committally. "Now, I believe Mrs. Wilson is waiting to discuss the decorations for tonight's tree trimming." The housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, was indeed waiting in the drawing room, where servants were setting up an enormous fir tree in front of the bay window. At 8 feet tall, it dwarfed Eleanor, filling the air with the sharp, clean scent of pine. "Ah, Miss Eleanor," Mrs. Wilson said cheerfully, "just in time to approve the decorations. We've brought up the usual ornaments, plus the new ones your mother ordered from Germany." Boxes of treasures were being unpacked. Delicate glass baubles, carved wooden figures, gilded pine cones, and tiny candle holders that would be filled with real candles on Christmas Eve. "They're beautiful," Eleanor said, lifting a glass angel to the light. "Will we decorate today?" "This afternoon, miss. The candles will be lit after dinner, of course." Eleanor nodded, wandering among the boxes, her fingers brushed against strings of cranberries and popcorn waiting to be draped on the branches. Another box held paper cones that would be filled with sweets and hung on the tree. "Mrs. Wilson," she said suddenly, "for the workhouse visit tomorrow, what exactly does father take?" The housekeeper looked surprised by the question. "Well, let me see. Baskets with bread, ham, preserves, woolen stockings and caps, and oranges, of course, one for each child." "Just one orange?" "Yes, miss. They're quite special to those children." Mrs. Wilson busied herself arranging ornaments. "Now, about the garlands. Could we send more?" Eleanor interrupted. "More oranges, I mean, and perhaps some of the German sweets mother ordered." Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. "That's very thoughtful, miss. I'll speak to your father about it when he returns. And I want to come along tomorrow," Eleanor added firmly, "to see the workhouse for myself. I'm not sure that's—" "Please, Mrs. Wilson, it's Christmas." The housekeeper sighed. "I'll mention it to your father, but I make no promises. Now, shall we continue with the decorations?" The morning passed in a flurry of Christmas preparations. Eleanor helped the servants hang holly and ivy throughout the house, the dark glossy leaves and bright red berries bringing a touch of nature indoors. Mistletoe was suspended from the chandelier in the entryway, and pine boughs decorated the mantelpieces, filling the house with their fresh scent. In the kitchen, Cook was overseeing the making of mince pies, Christmas puddings, and a magnificent cake covered in snowy white icing. The air was rich with the smells of cinnamon, nutmeg, and brandy. "Might I try a mince pie?" Eleanor asked, peeking into the bustling kitchen. Cook, red-faced from the heat of the stoves, smiled indulgently. "Just one, mind you. The rest are for tonight's dinner and tomorrow." The pie was still warm, the pastry buttery and flaky, the filling rich with dried fruits and spices. Eleanor savoured it, thinking again of the workhouse children. Did they ever taste such things? Just before noon, the front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and her father's commanding presence. Cornelius Blackwood was a tall man with a thick beard, now dusted with snowflakes, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, seeing her on the stairs, "come give your father a Christmas kiss." She hurried down, inhaling his familiar scent of tobacco and cologne as he embraced her. Despite his frequent absences, she adored him completely. "Father, I want to ask you something," she said earnestly. "About tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow, handing his hat and coat to Mr. Parker. "What about tomorrow, my dear? I want to come with you, to the workhouse." Cornelius frowned, leading her into his study. Unlike the festive drawing room, this was a serious space, leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive desk dominated by ledgers and correspondence. Eleanor, the workhouse is no place for a young lady. It's difficult, the conditions, the people, But isn't that why we help them? Because their lives are difficult? She clasped her hands in front of her, a gesture her mother used when persuading father of something. I want to see where the gifts go. I want to understand. Her father studied her for a long moment. This isn't some Christmas entertainment, Eleanor. It's not like the pantomime or the shop windows at Harrods. I know that, she insisted. Please, father, it would mean so much to me. Cornelius sighed heavily, moving to the window. Below, the snow continued to fall, transforming the squalor of London into something pure and beautiful. Temporarily. Very well, he said finally, but you must stay close to me at all times. Speak only when spoken to. And remember that we are there to provide charity, not to gawk at less fortunate circumstances. Eleanor's heart leapt. Yes, father, I promise. Now, he said, his tone lightening, I believe we have a tree to decorate this afternoon. After luncheon, which her mother missed having only just risen for the day, the family gathered in the drawing room for the tree trimming. It was one of the few activities they did together as a family, a tradition Cornelius insisted upon despite Caroline's complaints that it was terribly German. The Queen and Prince Albert do it, Cornelius would always reply. If it's good enough for Victoria, it's good enough for us. Eleanor stood on a small stepladder, hanging ornaments on the higher branches, while her parents handled the more delicate decorations. The servants had strung cranberries and popcorn, and attached the candle holders to the branches. Now the family added the personal touches, glass baubles from Germany, small wooden toys, gilded pine cones, and paper angels. Mother, did you know father is letting me visit the workhouse tomorrow? Eleanor said, carefully hanging a blown glass star. Caroline Blackwood, elegant even in a simple day dress, looked up with alarm. Cornelius, you can't be serious. A workhouse is no place for Eleanor. I've already agreed, Caroline, her father said firmly. It will be educational for her. Educational to see those filthy, disease-ridden... They're just children, Mother, Eleanor interrupted. Children who don't have trees like ours or oranges whenever they want them. Caroline pressed her lips together. I see your father has already filled your head with his charity notions. Next you'll be joining those dreadful women who go slumming in the East End with their pamphlets and Bibles. I just want to see where our gifts go, Eleanor said quietly. That's all. She'll be perfectly safe with me, Cornelius assured his wife. The visit is brief, just long enough to distribute the gifts and speak with the master and matron. Caroline sniffed disapprovingly, but said no more, turning her attention back to the tree. As the short winter day faded to dusk, the tree was completed except for the candles, which would be lit after dinner. Eleanor stepped back to admire their work. It was magnificent, a perfect cone of green dotted with colour and sparkle, surrounded by wrapped packages in tissue paper and ribbons. Now, Cornelius said, I believe it's time to prepare for dinner and evening church service. Upstairs, Sarah helped Eleanor change into her Christmas Eve finery, a dress of deep green velvet with a white lace collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was brushed until it shone and tied back with a matching green ribbon. You look beautiful, miss, Sarah said, adjusting the ribbon, like a Christmas angel. Eleanor studied her reflection in the mirror. The girl who looked back seemed far removed from the workhouse children she'd been thinking about all day. Would they stare at her fine clothes tomorrow? Would they hate her for her good fortune? Sarah, she said suddenly, have you ever been to a workhouse? The maid's hands stilled on her hair. Not personally, miss, no, but my cousin was sent to one after her parents died of the fever. She was just 7. What happened to her? Sarah's face grew sad. She didn't last the winter. The cold, the poor food. It's a hard life, miss. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I'm going to visit a workhouse tomorrow, with father. Are you, miss? That's unusual. I want to take something special, something from me, not just from father's charity baskets. Eleanor turned from the mirror, her mind made up. Will you help me? After dinner that evening, the family gathered again in the drawing room. Mr. Parker and 2 footmen carefully lit the candles on the tree while the family watched from a safe distance. As the tiny flames caught, the tree seemed to come alive, glowing with magical light that reflected in the ornaments and cast dancing shadows on the walls. Beautiful, breathed Eleanor, momentarily forgetting her plans for tomorrow in the wonder of the moment. Even Caroline seemed moved, her usual cool demeanour softening in the candlelight. It is rather lovely, isn't it? Cornelius put his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her close. Merry Christmas Eve, my dears. For a rare moment, they were simply a family. Mother, father, daughter, bound together by the magic of Christmas Eve. Later, after church service and a late supper, Eleanor prepared for bed, but instead of climbing under her covers, she went to her window seat again. The snow had stopped and a full moon cast silver light over London, making the snow-covered rooftops gleam. Somewhere out there, beyond Berkeley Square, beyond the fashionable West End, was St. Bart's workhouse. Somewhere, other children were going to sleep with dreams not of presents and feasts, but of a single orange. Eleanor reached under her bed, pulling out the small sack she'd prepared with Sarah's help. Inside were 6 oranges taken from the kitchen when Cook wasn't looking, and a handful of sweets wrapped in paper twists. It wasn't much, nothing compared to her own Christmas abundance. But it was something from her, not just from Blackwood Bank's official charity. Tomorrow she would see the workhouse for herself. Tomorrow she would understand a world completely different from her own. The thought made her stomach flutter with both anticipation and fear. As she finally slipped into bed, Eleanor found herself thinking of unknown children in thin blankets, cold rooms, and hard beds. For the first time in her life, her own comfort made her feel slightly guilty. Outside, the moon sailed through the winter sky, shining on rich and poor alike. Christmas was coming to all of London, though what it would bring to each child varied greatly, depending on which side of the city they called home. Christmas morning. The excited whisper rippled through the girls' dormitory before dawn had even thought about breaking. Martha opened her eyes to see Betsy's face hovering inches from her own, the little girl's breath making small clouds in the frigid air. "Is it time?" Martha whispered back, instantly awake despite the early hour. "Is it really Christmas?" "Listen," said Nancy from the next bed. "They're ringing the chapel bells." Sure enough, the distant sound of bells floated through the darkness. Christmas Day, 1853. Even in the workhouse, this was a day unlike any other. Martha sat up, hugging her blanket around her shoulders. Frost had formed intricate patterns on the inside of the windows, and the air bit at her nose and cheeks. Yet there was an energy in the dormitory that even the cold couldn't dampen. "Oranges today," she whispered to Betsy, whose eyes grew wide with anticipation. Unlike normal days, when they would be roused by Mrs. Grimwig's harsh voice, Christmas morning began with the ringing of bells. The children were allowed to wake naturally, a small mercy, but one they appreciated deeply. One by one, the girls slipped from their beds, shivering as they dressed. Their best uniforms identical to their everyday ones, but with fewer patches, and darns had been laid out the night before. They helped each other with buttons and hair, a quiet camaraderie born of shared circumstance. "Think they'll let us sing carols at breakfast?" asked Betsy as Martha braided her hair. "Probably not," said Nancy, "but definitely at dinner when the benefactors come." Martha finished the braid and gave Betsy's shoulders a squeeze. "Come on, let's go down before all the hot water's gone." The washroom was only marginally warmer than the dormitory, heated by a small stove that did little against the December chill. The girls took turns at the pump, gasping as the cold water hit their skin. Martha helped Betsy wash her face, making sure her ears were clean. The matron always checked. "Martha," Betsy asked as they dried off with rough towels, "did you ask Father Christmas for anything?" Martha hesitated. At 6, Betsy still believed. At 10, Martha knew better, but she couldn't bear to break the younger girl's heart. "I asked for a warm day," she said finally, "so we can all be comfortable for once." "I asked for a doll," Betsy confessed, "with a real china face like the one in the toy shop window we saw when we went to church last month." Martha's heart squeezed painfully. "That's a lovely wish," she said, not having the heart to explain that Father Christmas rarely brought such expensive gifts to workhouse children. The breakfast bell rang, summoning them downstairs. The dining hall had been transformed overnight. Holly and ivy decorated the walls, and a small fir branch stood in the centre of each long table, adorned with paper chains made by the children in their rare free moments. "Look," whispered Betsy in awe. "It's beautiful." It wasn't, not really. The decorations were sparse, the paper chains faded from previous years, but compared to the usual barren hall, it seemed magical. Mr. Penge stood at the head table, unusually festive in a red waistcoat. "Children," he announced, "in honour of Christmas Day, a special breakfast will be served. You may speak quietly among yourselves during the meal." A murmur of excitement spread through the room. Speaking during meals was ordinarily forbidden, punishable by loss of food privileges. This was indeed a Christmas miracle. The usual porridge was replaced by bread with a thin scraping of butter and a spoonful of treacle. To children accustomed to the blandest food, this simple change was a feast worthy of kings. "It's so sweet," marvelled Betsy, licking treacle from her lips. Martha smiled, savouring her own portion. She caught sight of Tom across the room, sitting with the other boys. He gave her their secret signal, and she returned it. They were okay. It was Christmas. After breakfast came chapel, where the children sat in rigid rows as the workhouse chaplain delivered a sermon about the Christ child born in poverty, destined for greatness. Martha tried to listen, but her mind kept wandering to the afternoon, when the benefactors would arrive with their gifts and the oranges. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. There were no work duties on Christmas Day, but the children were expected to keep themselves occupied quietly. Some of the younger ones played simple games in corners of the dining hall, while others sat in groups, talking in hushed voices about Christmases past or imagined futures. Martha found a quiet corner with Betsy and a few other girls. "Let me tell you about the Christmas before I came here," she said, drawing them close. It was a story she'd told before, but one they never tired of hearing. "We lived in 2 rooms above a baker's shop. It was always warm because of the ovens below. At Christmas, the baker would give us a loaf of special bread with raisins and cinnamon, and my father would bring home an orange." "A whole one?" asked Betsy, wide-eyed. "A whole one, just for us 3. He'd peel it ever so carefully, making sure not to tear the peel, and then he'd divide it into perfect segments. 1/3 for him, 1/3 for my mother, 1/3 for me." Martha closed her eyes, remembering, "and we'd sit by our little fire, eating our orange segments and telling stories." "What happened to them?" asked a new girl, Emma, who hadn't heard the tale before. Martha's throat tightened. "The fever. 3 years ago. First my mother, then my father a week later. Is that why you came here? You and Tom?" Martha nodded. "No other family to take us in, but we're lucky, in a way. Some workhouses separate brothers and sisters completely. At least here we can see each other. A bell rang, signalling the midday meal. The children filed back into the dining hall, which had been further transformed. The long tables were now covered with white cloths, threadbare and mended, but clean, and at each place was a sprig of holly. And there, at the head table, was the Christmas pudding. Enormous and round, it sat on a platter, dark and rich, with a sprig of holly stuck in the top. The children stared at it in wonder as they took their seats. Mr. Penge stood once more. "Children, before we begin our Christmas dinner, I must remind you of the gratitude you owe to your benefactors who have provided this special meal and the gifts that will follow. I expect exemplary behaviour from each of you." Martha barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the kitchen door, where she could see servants carrying large trays of food. Not the usual thin soup and bread, but something that steamed and smelled of meat and vegetables. "Is that real beef?" whispered Betsy, her nose twitching like a rabbit's. Nancy leaned close. "It is. And there's potatoes too. I saw them peeling mountains of them this morning." The food was served with great ceremony. Each child received a portion of beef stew with potatoes and carrots, small by outside standards, but a feast to the workhouse children. They ate slowly, savouring every bite, making it last. Martha closed her eyes as she chewed a piece of beef, trying to remember the last time she'd tasted meat. Last Christmas, perhaps. The rich flavour was almost overwhelming after months of bland porridge and thin soup. After the main course came the pudding, carried in with great ceremony. It wasn't aflame with brandy as it might have been in a wealthy home, but the children didn't know the difference. To them, it was magnificent. Each received a small portion, dense and sweet with dried fruits and spices. Martha watched Betsy take her first bite, the little girl's eyes widening with pleasure. "It's the most delicious thing I've ever tasted," Betsy declared, her voice hushed with reverence. Martha smiled, enjoying her own portion with deliberate slowness. This moment, this rare taste of something special needed to be stretched out, savoured, committed to memory to sustain her through the lean months ahead. As they ate, a murmur of excitement began near the dining hall doors. Martha craned her neck to see what was happening. Her heart skipped a beat. They were here, the benefactors. Led by Mr. Penge, a group of well-dressed ladies and gentlemen entered the hall. They wore fur-trimmed coats and tall hats, and they carried baskets covered with cloths. Behind them came servants with more baskets, and Martha's breath caught a wooden crate, the oranges. The children stilled, watching with wide eyes as the visitors processed into the room. They were not allowed to speak unless spoken to, but a ripple of anticipation passed through them like wind through wheat. Mr. Penge cleared his throat importantly. "Children, I present Mr. Cornelius Blackwood of Blackwood Bank, our most generous benefactor, and his distinguished guests. They have come to bring you Christmas gifts." A tall man with a thick beard stepped forward. Unlike some of the other visitors who were looking around with barely disguised distaste or pity, Mr. Blackwood's expression was kind. "Merry Christmas, children," he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "It is my pleasure to bring you these small tokens of the season." Small tokens. Martha knew better. Whatever was in those baskets represented more luxury than the workhouse children would see for the rest of the year. And then she noticed something unusual. Standing slightly behind Mr. Blackwood was a girl about Martha's own age, dressed in a green velvet dress with a white fur muff. She was staring around the dining hall with wide eyes, taking in everything: the sparse decorations, the children in their identical uniforms, the remains of the Christmas pudding on their plates. A girl. A benefactor's daughter. Martha had never seen a child accompany the Christmas visitors before. The servants began distributing the basket's contents. Each child received a pair of woolen stockings, a cap, and an apple. More useful than exciting, but the children accepted them with genuine gratitude. Warm stockings were a treasure when you owned only one pair. Martha pulled on her new stockings immediately, sighing with pleasure at their softness. Beside her, Betsy was examining her apple with the reverence usually reserved for jewels. "It's so red," she whispered, "and shiny." But the best was yet to come. Mr. Blackwood himself stepped forward as the wooden crate was opened, revealing neat rows of oranges, bright spots of colour in the drab surroundings. "And now," he announced, "a special Christmas treat for each child." The distribution began. Each child stepped forward when their name was called, curtsied or bowed to the benefactors, and received their orange with cupped hands, as if accepting something precious beyond measure. Martha Watts, called Mrs. Grimwig, reading from the ledger. Martha stood, smoothing her apron with suddenly trembling hands. She approached Mr. Blackwood, dropping into the curtsy she'd been taught. "Merry Christmas, Martha," he said kindly, placing an orange in her outstretched hands. "Thank you, sir," she replied, the ritual response she'd been taught. "God bless you for your generosity." But as she took the orange, her eyes met those of the girl in green velvet. There was curiosity in that gaze, and something else, a kind of wonder, as if Martha were some exotic creature from a distant land. The orange was heavy in her hands, its skin rough and dimpled, its colour vibrant against her pale fingers. She could already smell its citrus scent, sharp and sweet. Her mouth watered, but she wouldn't eat it yet. This treasure would be saved, prolonged, made to last. "Elizabeth Foster," Mrs. Grimwig called, and Betsy stepped forward for her turn. Martha returned to her seat, cradling her orange carefully. Around her, other children were doing the same, examining their treasures with reverent fingers, lifting them to their noses to inhale the scent. Nobody ate their orange. Not yet. This was too precious to rush. After every child had received their gift, Mr. Penge instructed them to sing carols for their benefactors. They stood in their neat rows, and their voices, thin from poor nutrition but sweet with youth, filled the dining hall with "God rest ye merry gentlemen" and "The holly and the ivy." Martha sang automatically, the familiar words coming easily, but her attention was on the girl in green velvet. She was standing slightly apart from the other visitors, watching the children with an intensity that was almost unsettling. When their eyes met again, the girl smiled hesitantly. Martha looked away quickly. It wouldn't do to be caught staring at the benefactors. Mrs. Grimwig had warned them about that. When the carols were finished, Mr. Blackwood made a short speech about charity and goodwill, which the children listened to with polite attention. Then, with a final "Merry Christmas," the visitors prepared to leave. As they filed out, Martha noticed the girl in green velvet lagging behind, looking back over her shoulder. Their eyes met one final time, and Martha had the strangest feeling that the girl wanted to say something to her. But then one of the other visitors, a woman in a fur-trimmed cloak, took the girl's arm and hurried her along. And then they were gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume, the warmth of new woolen stockings, and the treasure of oranges. The remainder of Christmas Day passed in a haze of unusual leisure. The children were allowed to play quiet games in the dining hall or to sit in groups talking. Some of the younger ones fell asleep, worn out by the excitement and the unaccustomed rich food. Martha found Tom during this free time and they sat together in a corner, comparing their treasures. "Did you get stockings too?" she asked, showing him hers. He nodded. "And a cap. It's actually warm." He touched the orange in his lap. "Are you going to eat yours now?" Martha shook her head. "Not yet. I'm saving it." "Me too." Tom looked around to make sure no one was watching, then leaned closer. "I saw you looking at that girl, the one in the green dress." "I wasn't looking," Martha protested. "Not really." "She was looking at you too. Wonder why they brought her." Martha shrugged. "Maybe to show her how lucky she is, to see how the poor live. Did you see her fur muff? Bet that cost more than everything we own put together." "Probably," Martha agreed, "but she seemed nice. She smiled at me." Tom made a dismissive noise. "They all smile on Christmas Day. It's the rest of the year they forget we exist." Martha couldn't argue with that. The benefactors came once a year, distributed their gifts, accepted the children's gratitude, and departed, their charitable duty done until next Christmas. But still, there had been something different about the girl in green velvet, something in her eyes that wasn't pity or disgust or the blank charity-minded kindness of the other visitors. As the short winter day faded to dusk, the children were given bread and cheese for their supper plain fare, but still better than usual, and sent to their dormitories earlier than normal. The excitement of the day had tired them out, and even the usually restless ones settled quickly. In the girls' dormitory, Martha sat on her bed, her orange cradled in her hands. Around her, other girls were similarly engaged, examining their treasures in the fading light. "When will you eat yours?" Betsy asked from the next bed, her own orange clutched tightly. "Not yet," Martha said. "I'm saving it for a special moment." "When?" Martha considered. "Maybe tomorrow, or the next day. I want to make it last." Nancy, more practical, had already devised a plan. "I'm going to eat half tomorrow and save half for New Year's Day. That way I get 2 treats instead of 1. The other girls nodded appreciatively at this wisdom. As darkness fell completely, Mrs. Grimwig came through to check that they were all in bed. For once, her manner was almost gentle. "Sleep well, girls," she said. "Merry Christmas." When she had gone, Martha lay in her narrow bed, the orange on her pillow beside her head. Its scent was subtle but distinct, a sweet reminder of the world outside the workhouse walls, a world of sunshine and warmth and fruit that grew on trees instead of arriving once a year in a wooden crate. She thought again of the girl in green velvet. What was her Christmas like? A tree with real candles, probably, mountains of presents, as much fruit as she could eat, any day of the year. Yet there had been something in those eyes, a kind of loneliness perhaps. It was hard to imagine that a girl with so much could feel anything but happiness. But Martha had seen something there, something familiar. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the windowsill with white. Martha pulled her blanket higher, grateful for her new woolen stockings keeping her feet warm. Beside her, Betsy was already asleep, her orange clutched to her chest like a doll. Despite the cold, despite the hard bed and thin blanket, despite the knowledge that tomorrow would bring a return to the usual workhouse routine, Martha felt a strange contentment. Today had been special. Today she had been given an orange, a pair of warm stockings, and a meal with real meat and pudding. And perhaps, though she hardly dared acknowledge the thought, she had made a connection, however brief, with someone from the outside world, someone who had looked at her not as a workhouse inmate, a number in a ledger, but as a girl, a person. With that comforting thought, Martha drifted into sleep, the orange's gentle scent following her into dreams of sunshine and trees laden with golden fruit. Eleanor woke to the gentle sound of Sarah drawing back her bed curtains. Outside, snow was falling again, soft flakes drifting past her window like scattered sugar. "Merry Christmas, Miss Eleanor," Sarah said, her face wreathed in smiles. "A beautiful morning, and look, Father Christmas has been..." At the foot of Eleanor's bed lay a stocking, bulging with small parcels wrapped in coloured paper and ribbon. A larger pile of presents waited on a table nearby, each one beautifully wrapped. Eleanor sat up, excitement fluttering in her stomach despite her thoughts from the night before. Christmas morning held magic even for the most troubled heart. "What time is it?" she asked, reaching for the stocking. "Just past 7, miss. Your parents aren't up yet." "But I thought you might like to open your stocking presents." Sarah busied herself at the fireplace, adding coal to the already crackling fire. Eleanor tipped the contents of the stocking onto her counterpane. Out tumbled an assortment of small treasures chocolate wrapped in silver foil, a tiny doll with a porcelain face, a kaleidoscope, hair ribbons in every colour, a wooden puzzle, and at the very bottom, an orange. She picked up the orange, turning it in her hands, just like the ones the workhouse children would receive today. Except this was just one small gift among many, not a once-a-year treasure. "Will you be going with your father to the workhouse today, miss?" Sarah asked, laying out Eleanor's Christmas dress red velvet with white lace trim, far more elaborate than yesterday's blue wool. "Yes," Eleanor replied, still looking at the orange. "Father agreed yesterday." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment. "It'll be an education for you, miss, though perhaps not a pleasant one." "What's it like, really?" Eleanor set aside the orange and looked up at her maid. "You said your cousin was in one." Sarah's face grew sombre. "It's a hard life, miss. Cold rooms, little food, endless work. The children rise before dawn and work until dark, with lessons squeezed in when they can. They wear the same uniform every day, sleep in dormitories with dozens of others, and rarely get enough to eat." She hesitated. "My cousin wrote to my mother once before she died, said the worst part was being hungry all the time." Eleanor tried to imagine it: constant hunger, endless work, no privacy, no pretty dresses or toys or books. It seemed impossible, like something from a particularly grim fairy tale, not real life in London. "But today they get oranges," she said softly, "and stockings and caps. Father told me." "Yes, miss. Christmas is the one day of brightness in their year." Sarah turned back to the fire. "They'll remember it for months afterward." Eleanor thought about this as Sarah helped her dress and arranged her hair. The red velvet dress was new, made specially for Christmas Day, with a full skirt supported by layers of petticoats and a white lace collar that tickled her chin. Her dark hair was brushed until it shone, then tied back with a matching red ribbon. "You look beautiful, miss," Sarah said, standing back to admire her work. "Like a Christmas angel." Eleanor studied herself in the mirror. The girl who looked back was clean, well-fed, beautifully dressed. Nothing like the workhouse children she'd soon meet. Would they hate her for her good fortune? Or would they, like the crossing sweeper boy who sometimes smiled at her, simply accept that the world was arranged this way, with some born to plenty and others to want? Downstairs, Eleanor found the drawing room transformed by Christmas magic. The tree, lit last night with real candles, now presided over a sea of wrapped gifts. Holly and ivy adorned every surface, and a fire blazed in the grate, filling the room with warmth and the scent of burning applewood. Her father was already there, dressed in his finest morning suit, examining a book from one of his unwrapped gifts. "Merry Christmas, my dear," he exclaimed, setting aside the book to embrace her. "You look positively festive." "Merry Christmas, father," Eleanor replied, breathing in his familiar scent of tobacco and bay rum. "Are there presents to open before breakfast?" Cornelius laughed. "So eager." "Yes. I believe we can open a few while we wait for your mother. She's always late on Christmas morning." It was a family joke that Caroline Blackwood, so punctual for social engagements, could never seem to rise on time for family celebrations. Eleanor suspected it was her mother's way of expressing how little she valued these moments compared to her dinner parties and charity balls. Eleanor and her father sat before the tree, and he handed her a large rectangular package wrapped in silver paper and tied with blue ribbon. "This one first, I think," he said with a smile. Eleanor carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound book with gilt edges. "The Arabian Nights," she read from the cover. "Oh, father, thank you. I've been wanting to read these stories." "I thought you might enjoy some adventures," he said, pleased by her reaction. "Though perhaps not as adventurous as our expedition to the workhouse this afternoon." Eleanor looked up at him. "I've been thinking about that. The oranges we're taking, could we bring more? One seems so small." Cornelius's expression softened. "It's not just the orange, Eleanor. It's what it represents. Something rare, something special, something that marks Christmas as different from ordinary days. But we have bowls